Josiah Parker is not only the local hero of the Revolutionary War, but specifically the hero of the Battle of Mackie's Mill. In 1774 and 1775, this is where our committees of safety met. Specifically, Josiah Parker was one of the leaders of our committees of safety. The committees of safety were formed, and they had other names. Once, just after the battles of Lexington and Concord, and actually even before that, each county in colonial America, all up and down, all 13 colonies, had to make up its mind how they were going to deal with the British, all right? And so these committees of safety, meeting right across the street here, decided for Isle of Wight County what they were going to do if the British showed up in force, which didn't happen until 1781. We'll get to that in a second. But that's what the committees of safety were. They met in that building, partially under the leadership of Josiah Parker. I always like to start with this, the Battle of Great Bridge, and I only start here because this was really the first successful engagement. The Battle of Great Bridge was actually one of the very first engagements of the American Revolution after battles of Lexington and Concord. And in short, what happened was the British were trying to make sure that the city of Norfolk was protected. And so they set up defenses at Great Bridge, and they were attacked by then the colonials moved in. Specifically now, the Isle of Wight County militia was part of this. And they went down there to confront the British. And they taunted the British into attacking, and that's what made the Battle of Great Bridge a great colonial victory, because the British attacked and they were basically repelled. They weren't quite wiped out, but it forced the British and Lord Dunmore eventually to abandon the city of Norfolk. And early in January 1st, 1776 is when Dunmore abandoned Norfolk, and it was because of the Battle of Great Bridge. Great Bridge was the primary crossing point between North and South, because everything else was sort of waterways. A very famous incident where Benedict Arnold, a general and a hero of the American Revolution, decided that his chances were better, his promotion chances were better with the other side. And so in the phrase of the time, he turned coat. Y'all probably familiar with this story as well as I am, but he conspired with the British to turn over to West Point. Now, the military academy wasn't there yet, but it was a strong defensive point. That's why it's called West Point on the Hudson River. And then a few colonials captured Major Andre, found the document where Benedict Arnold was planning to do that, and the whole thing blew up, and that's when Benedict Arnold had to row across the Hudson River and get away, because George Washington was be there the next day, and we're going to find out everything. So that's why, and of course we dwell on him for just a little bit here, because of course he plays the major role, one of the major roles, at least for the British side, in the Battle of Mackie's Mill. And of course the reason that Benedict Arnold was sent down here after he turned coat, you all know what that means. The Americans wore blue coats, the British wore red coats. And so when you turn coat and you go to the other side, you dress up in the red instead of the blue. The reason he was sent down here is the British didn't want him up in New York. He'd already turned coat. And they did not trust Benedict Arnold up there in New York, because they were thinking, well, if he changed sides once, he might change sides again. And so that's why they sent Benedict Arnold down here to Virginia for the operation that eventually ended up in the Battle of Mackie's Mill. Gabriel Muhlenberg, general, he's the one that's famous for, people are not quite sure whether this actually happened, but supposedly in 1770, he was a preacher in middle Virginia, in Shenandoah Valley. and he gathered his churchgoers together, and he was wearing, of course, his church cloak, and he quoted from Ecclesiastes as a time for peace and a time for war, and then he said, it's a time for war, and he took off his clerical robe, and he was already outfitted as a colonial, a general in on the American side. So that's what he's very proud. Now, of course, the anecdote is that he called instantly for the formation of a regiment and enlisted about 200 of its parishioners, male parishioners, right away to go out and form the regiment. We think that's true, and it makes a good story, and that's why he's sort of. But the whole point is now that he has been put in command of the operations here in the lower part of Virginia by George Washington. Okay, Muhlenberg's in command. The obvious choice for a local commander for this area is who? Josiah Parker. He's already proven, Battle of Trenton. Josiah Parker is the one who led the 1st Virginia Regiment in that Battle of Trenton, where they basically engaged the Hessians, and it was really the first major victory of the Revolutionary War and for the American side, and gave a real incentive now for the colonial side to win. Benedict Arnold was sent down here to Virginia to really do a couple things, really to disrupt things. The very first, now this map, that's the James River right there, going up towards Richmond. Have you all heard of Flower 200? It's a plantation up there, and Hood's Point. And on 31 December 1780, this is how far Arnold's force got. Now, they had assembled in the Chesapeake Bay, in Hampton Roads Harbor actually, and came up the James River, and they got to this point right here, and this is the first place where they landed. Arnold's attack was really a surprise to everybody. We weren't sure what was going on, even though Muhlenberg was communicating with Josiah Parker and Thomas Jefferson, really weren't sure exactly what the intent was of General Benedict Arnold. He lands here first, comes ashore, captures a small a part of artillery that was supposed to help Josiah Parker. And so now it's pretty clear now what Benedict Arnold and his small army, we'll talk about that in just a second, is going. He's headed for Richmond. He goes up to Richmond. This is Richmond, basically in 1781. Not much there. But it was the capital. Why was the capital moved to Richmond? Okay, hold on. Where was the capital before Richmond? Williamsburg. Thank you. All right. Everybody's supposed to say that at the same time. Yeah, Williamsburg. They moved the capital just a few weeks before this to Richmond. Why did they move it? It was too much in a strategically vulnerable location, right on, close to the James River. And exactly what happened. Arnold would come up in his ships, or the British would, and so for safety now, the Virginia government decided to relocate to Richmond, even though there was hardly anything there. That shows the James River. Well, Arnold got there. He worked his way up by ship, burned a couple of plantations, landed in Richmond, basically burned what he could, burned a lot of supplies. Remember, that was his mission, was to disrupt planning here in Virginia. But he stayed only there for a few days, enough to do a lot of damage in Richmond. And Thomas Jefferson got out just ahead of him, and the legislature did, because they got word that he was coming up the river because he landed there at Hood's Point. So the next thing he did after he burned Richmond, he did a few things in Chesterfield County and also in Petersburg, and comes back down the river and lands again. Here's Hood's Point, lands at Flower 200, and by now, Josiah Parker and his locals pretty much think they know what he's going to do, and they're able to mass. But they clashed here at Robinson's Crossroads. There were a few casualties, but at this point is where General Benedict Arnold learned that he was going to be opposed, as he came down the south side of the river. All right, the next thing Arnold did with his, he got back on his ships and went down to Cobham's Wharf, which I hope you all have heard of, right across the river from Jamestown, okay, and there's Cobham. That was the chief supply point in 1781, and that's where all the stores were. And that's why Benedict Arnold landed there and burned a lot of patriot supplies and everything at Cobham's Wharf. Now we're up to Saturday the 13th of January, 1781. This is the day that von Steuben now, all these guys are here in Virginia under George Washington, because this is where the threat is. This is the day that General von Steuben gave Josiah Parker command of all the militia units here on the south side. So that was, so finally Josiah Parker had some unity of command over here. Nansemond County, Norfolk, Princess Anne County. Sunday the 14th of January, 1781, dawned cold and wet. We think maybe about 40 or 50 degrees. Benedict Arnold is headed for Portsmouth. He had about 800 soldiers. Part of them were these Germans, about 100 Germans, riflemen, and they're part of Arnold's little force, and they're important because they play a key role in the Battle of Mackie's Mill. So he had about 100 of these guys. He also had 400 redcoats, the 80th Regiment of Foot under Colonel Dundas, and that's the only image I could find of Dundas, which is a tomb in England, but that's what the redcoats look like. Under Colonel Beverly Robinson, he had 170 loyalists. Now these were Americans fighting for the British, loyalist regiments, and he had 120 mounted dragoons of the Queen's Own Rangers under Lieutenant Colonel British Simcoe. Notice the red coat, that's the key there. I like that image of the dragoons because it's sort of, okay, it's winter, you can tell by the trees, that's what they look like. Could even be Isle of Wight County, although it's not in that particular image. But that's what they look like when they came through here. He also had 30 men from the Royal Artillery with 2 small field cannons, all told about 850 men-at-arms, total of 1,000 because he had a large baggage train, he had some camp followers, but that's what's headed down to Isle of Wight County. He gets to Pagan Mill. This is Wren's Mill down here. Pagan's Mill was just above Wren's Mill. This was the first encounter at Pagan Mill. Then he heads down to Wren's Mill, and he encounters a Major Thomas Pierce on the American side, runs into actually a Hessian soldier up near Wren's Mill as part of Arnold's force, and he was taken prisoner. And they confiscated a lot of money from Major Thomas Pierce. But Thomas Pierce now is the one who lived at Pierceville, all right? Okay, now, so Benedict Arnold gets down here on the 15th. Army camps overnight, not only in town here in Smithfield, but most of them up at Pierceville. But fortunately, Colonel Josiah Parker, not General Colonel, is ready for him. And we're lucky that we actually had a color photograph of Colonel Josiah Parker getting ready to lead the Isle of Wight County militia. You're supposed to laugh at that. Come on now, come on. All right, thank you very much. Color photographs from 250 years ago are pretty rare. That's the mill pond at Wren's Mill. Smithfield is like right in here. There's the Pagan River, here's the Pagan Creek. This is Cypress Creek right here. And this shows the, let's see, there's got the Hessians, the Loyalists, and the 80th Regiment of Foot. Headed for, he leaves on the morning of January 16th. That's where the part of the British fleet was waiting for him to take him back up north, because Benedict Arnold had basically completed the mission that he was sent down to do. The first thing that happens is Arnold sends a good portion of the 80th Regiment of Foot up to what we call today Battery Park. That's where they knew that Josiah Parker's plantation was. the Smithfield Station Bridge. It's called the Red Point Bridge. It was a rickety bridge there, and that's where this force went across right there. That's where that bridge is. So now the rest of the force heads for Portsmouth, and they're headed for basically along Scott's Factory Road, and here's where they encounter Josiah Parker. He's got 2 artillery pieces and the Isle of Wight County militia right there. It's about a mile down from Six Oaks. I call it 27 Pines because I think all the oaks are gone now, but at that time it was known as Six Oaks. Right there at the corner of today's Scott's Factory. This is that intersection. There's Great Springs coming in this way. This is today's Scott's Factory. And right there, this would have been, except for the telephone poles and the paved road, this would have been the view that Arnold's force would have had heading down towards Cypress Creek. And there we are right there, today's Scott's Factory Road. Of course, what they didn't know until they got there was that Josiah Parker and his Isle of Wight County militia and 2 small cannons on the continental side were waiting for him. And that just shows that right there. This is where he's headed. That shows now what we're talking about. This is where the engagement was on 16 January 1781. Now, it's all trees now. It's a modern photograph, but it probably was not at the time. It was probably pretty much cleared because that's where Mackie's Mill was. And Mackie's Mill was a grist mill, it was a sawmill, and probably most of the trees had been cut down. But okay, now just to refresh just a minute, Arnold's forces have come down Great Springs Road. They're heading down where Colonel Josiah Parker's people are waiting for him. Cypress Creek is on this side, and on that side, Scott's Factory, which came along 100 years later, was all up there. So this is basically where the British now met the Patriot militia. The Patriot militia under Josiah Parker and the Isle of Wight County militia are arrayed on this side of the stream there. Dundalk's 80th Regiment of Foot determined that Josiah Parker was not there, and so they started returning. Now, the battle, as it's developing, is right here. And so all of a sudden, Josiah Parker is aware that the Redcoats are on this side of Cypress Creek. And so he knows he's in trouble at that point, so he knows he has to do something. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Now, what that shows you is how that 80th Regiment of Foot came all the way down here and is coming along on the east side of Cypress Creek. This is the actual battlefield today. That pond was not there. The Patriot militia was lined up on the other side of Cypress Creek, over here. And the British now are coming to this side. And this is where Arnold is coming down. These are the British forces. Here is Cypress Creek. Here's Cypress Creek. Eventually, Scott's Factory will be built right here. There's the huge mill pond. And that's Mackie's Mill right there. As I say, a lumber and grist mill. And this is where Colonel Josiah Parker's militia and his 2 guns right here are lined up on that side of the creek. A very, very good defensive position, all right? And so Benedict Arnold is coming down. These Lieutenant Colonel Simcoe's regiments pictured there, and he's got other soldiers, and they're advancing. And they come across Colonel Josiah Parker's position right there at Mackie's Mill. And this is actually the field where the British regulars were attacking Josiah Parker's Isle of Wight County militia. The British infantry was stopped because of Colonel Parker's 2 6-pounder guns they were firing at him, all right? This is where the Germans come in. This is where Colonel Simcoe took those German Hessian Jaeger riflemen, and they started shooting directly at Colonel Parker's gunners. Killed about a half a dozen of them. And that's when Colonel Josiah Parker decided that it wasn't worth it. He was getting his local people killed, and he was obviously, Parker had about 200 soldiers, 200 militia. And remember, Benedict Arnold has 850. So Colonel Parker makes a decision to pull out and to withdraw. And that basically is the Battle of Mackie's Mill. This is what we call an order of battle. On the patriot side, you've got Parker with the Isle of Wight County militia and 2 small cannon. On the British side, you got Benedict Arnold, Dundas Robinson. I talked to all those guys. A total of about 850. This shows you the various regiments that were there, including here the German Jaegers. Most people don't realize that the German army was here in Isle of Wight County 250 years ago and played the decisive role in the Battle of Mackie's Mill. Casualties, you can see on the American side, 11 killed, 8 wounded, 31 of them taken prisoner. They're mostly Isle of Wight County militia. And as I said, they were all paroled. That means they were let go within a few days because Arnold didn't want to take a bunch of Americans with him. On the British side, there were 3 killed and 5 wounded. And that sort of summarizes that the Battle of Mackie's Mill. So what did Arnold do? This is where the battle is like right in here. He goes down, goes and into Portsmouth to get back on the ships.
So how did he get to Portsmouth? How did he get over the water?
Oh, okay. You've heard of the King's Highway and the King's Highway Bridge. All right, that's where he was sort of headed for, and that's a whole nother story about how about that highway that came down. It was really the first U.S. Highway 1, after we won the American Revolution. But that's what he was headed for, and he basically went sort of cross country and along generally what we think of as Route 10 today, Route 10. And when he got in the vicinity, and of course it wasn't Route 10 in those days, but when he got in the vicinity of Chuckatuck, that's where you sort of make a left there, and that's where King's Highway Bridge used to be, and that's where he went across and then on into Portsmouth where he got back on the ships.
Yeah, how long was the battle? Was it just
a couple hours? He didn't really get all his forces up there until about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. That's when the battle occurred. By 4 p.m. it was all over.